Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to be back with you again for the big show on the Sunday. Well, not all big shows, but you know what I mean. The weekly review show. I hope yours are well. And without further ado, let's bring in the crew. And start there over in Old Ricky. We've got Lloyd Quinnan.
Hi Roddy, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself, young man?
Oh, not bad, not bad.
Good stuff. And over in North Dakota, we've got the old Coatbridge Cavalier himself.
How yous all doing? Hope everything's going well. It's chilling out a wee bit here as the snow comes, as we're expecting it within the month.
Oh, lovely, jubbly. And up there in Clickmannanshire, we've got our favourite lawyer. It's our Eva.
Hi everyone. It's getting cold. You're not snowing yet, but I have a funny feeling it's not that far away. Winter is coming, as somebody said.
My goodness, am I glad I live where I live. Down there in the borders, we have our Yvonne.
Hi, it's going to sound like an episode of Game of Thrones, but winter is coming for sure.
See, you look there all wrapped up. I'm sitting in a pair of shorts.
I am. I don't like the cold.
You know, it actually dovetails nicely. It was a nice segue here into our wee topic because it was 9 years ago yesterday that I decided to move to Barcelona. I took the choice, Barhead, Barcelona, and I plumped for Barcelona because it was just the day after the independence referendum. And I plumped for it. Now we're 9 years on, Lloyd. And I find it difficult to think it's 9 years on. And we're meant to be preparing next month for a no ifs, no buts independence referendum that the previous First Minister promised us. In 9 years, how much have we progressed towards independence, Lloyd?
We have not progressed as a movement because we're divided. And primarily we're divided because of the actions of the Scottish National Party and the previous leader. This is a tragedy. The excitement, the energy, the effort of so many people in 2014 has been effectively cast to the four winds for the sake of keeping some rather unimpressive people in work. In some ways, for me, it's a similar feeling to the feeling we had after 1979, when there had been an SNP group at Westminster that went rogue, a referendum that was rigged against us, and then huge dissipation of energy and commitment afterwards. And in some ways, it's the people out with the parties and people who have gone to creating the new parties that are maintaining any energy that there is within the movement, and those of us who are, still involved in groups formed in 2014, which still maintain themselves to this day. But the energy is dissipating, it's sapping day by day. And I think some people out there believe that with a change of leader, there might have been a reinvigoration. But sadly, continuity means no reinvigoration, no new ideas. Indeed, neither of the leader at Westminster nor the leader of the First Minister, who supposedly co-wrote a motion to the SNP conference outlining the strategy for the next election, seemed to be on the same page on it. The other night on debate night, we had Stephen Flynn telling us that it was the majority of seats, then it was the majority of votes, or it was just more seats than anybody else. It's utter confusion. And the tragedy is, each and every day has been said by everyone on this programme, each and every day that we are further from our independence, our people are suffering. And those who are culpable for this will pay the price in history.
They should. What about you, Phil? Do you feel we've moved on any glimmer of hope you can see from 9 years ago? any advancement?
Well, obviously not, and there are some people being brought in to the SNP to deliberately undermine whether their intentions. See, there's a real mixture of people in the SNP, and it's completely changed from when I joined in. I know you guys are older school than I, but when I came in, it was dedicated. We knew what we were about. Everybody understood the Prime Directive. This is what we're fighting for. You were more tolerant of each other because you knew that we were of different stripes, but we all had a unifying principle that kept us aligned. And whether we agree on NATO or otherwise, we could debate it openly, honestly, come to a democratic decision and go with it, because we know that was the decision of the people who want Scotland to determine its own future. And let's face it, we're the people that are most likely to vote in a future Scotland as we determine what we do, how we do it, and who we engage with. So looking at the contrast, the huge contrast, and bear in mind I worked very closely with Alex in the SNP when Alex was in charge, and then because I was up in the northeast, Aberdeenshire West, which is a real frontier constituency right in the heart of the Tory heartland. It's really, really tough fighting, and yet we had the giant that was Aberdeenshire East off to the just next door to us, who were great, and some wonderful people there who really knew their stuff, a real heartland. So to see all that magnificent work and all these great people betrayed. We have been betrayed by Nicola and her cabal. It's an absolute disgrace what they've done, and I don't forgive. I can't forgive betrayal like that, and I never will. You wisen up. People need to wisen up and do something about it. And what I did was I fought it as much as I could. It took me long enough to figure it out, and even a casual observer looking back over the last 9 years will see we have not moved one step forward, not one. In fact, we're regressing. And there's so many good critiques of this. Read Wings Over Scotland. Look at our blogs. Look at what we've been saying, and many, Craig, Murray. So many of us saw this coming. But the Wings Over Scotland in particular, and it's an absolute horror show, I'm afraid, and we need to fix it.
Yeah, we do either 9 years on. Can you believe it was 9 years? Do you see any chink of light anywhere?
Sometimes
well,
it feels. Oh, sorry.
Was that Eva or Yvonne?
Eva.
Oh, right. Go ahead, Eva.
Sometimes it feels like 99 years because it's been such a drudge and such a bloody letdown. If you cast your mind back, though, in the early 1990s, I was an SNP councillor, very much in a minority in Clackmannanshire because it was one of the heartlands of Labour. And we worked so hard to turn that around and to end up having SNP SPs come 1999 and an SNP-controlled council. And it breaks my heart to have to say that today, 9 years after the referendum, the statistics on homelessness and poverty and child poverty and food banks and God knows every bloody indicator that you get of deprivation in Clackmannanshire is just the same as it was then as it is today. We have not progressed. We had several years between 2007 and 2014 when Alec did run competent government. But between 2014-15 and now, we've had year in and year out, and now it almost seems like day in and day out, government that has been shambolic and out of touch with the desires of most of the population of the country. But the reason why in 2015 there was such a surge behind the SNP was because in 2014 we had a United Yes campaign. Not everybody who voted yes voted SNP, but everybody who was in the SNP voted yes. But that was then. This is now. What we've got now are people in the SNP who are devolutionists. The leadership, They talk about defending devolution. They talk about creating a fairer, greener Scotland. They talk about our international obligations, and they give money to multiple efforts and endeavours abroad. And they seem to forget consistently that they were elected for Westminster or for Holyrood to deliver self-determination to Scotland. So what Humza Yousaf has done so far in his first 100 and odd days is just replicate, as we've said, what Nicola Sturgeon did in her 8.5 years. She broke a lot of records in her time. Unfortunately, he's going to break a few too, and it's going to be the most abysmal performance that a First Minister who's supposed to promote independence has ever done. Scotland is going to be on its knees if this leadership is allowed to continue the way that it's going. People are hungry, they are cold, they're going to become more cold. We said earlier, laughingly, winter is coming, but it's no joke for literally hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland who are going to be able to look, offshore onto oil rigs or in the hills behind me at wind turbines, and then they're going to look at the wee wheels spinning round and round on the gas and electricity meters. They're going to be looking online at bank accounts and thinking, how the bloody hell am I going to pay for that this winter? What's going to happen at Christmas time? Can I buy my kids Christmas presents? And single working people are probably going to be the worst off of all. We're looking at record statistics for all sorts of illnesses and the ills of our country, and it's unnecessary. It's only happening because we're led by people at the moment who can't see beyond the end of their own nose in their latest selfie, whether it's in New York or, God knows where. They're needing to get boots on the ground, chap doors, and speak to the real people of this country about the real things that affect them. Because this debacle of a government that we've got now is utterly shameless in its self-promotion, and it's forgetting entirely who put them where they are, why they're there, and what they were elected to deliver. It was not to be polite, comfy, wee parliamentarians who went down there to settle down. They went there to settle up. And those that are in Holyrood today should be reminding their colleagues in Westminster every day what the job is. And it's not to go on the television in debate night or question time or anything similar and fluff their lines. They're fluffing them because they don't understand and they don't mean what they say. Watch them, because every one of them in the SNP leadership today speaks with forked tongue.
They do indeed. They do indeed. That's the tragic thing. Yvonne, we were told by the previous leader of the Scottish Government, the SNP, she told us no ifs, no buts. In October 23, you will have an independence referendum. Just one more mandate, please. I'm not aware of them coming out and saying sorry. They've just let it sort of die away. They haven't actually come out and accepted a mea culpa that we're not going to get a no ifs, no buts independence referendum now or in the future.
It's like the Monty Python parrot. It's dead. The SNP is dead. We seem to have a wake for the SNP every week on through a Scottish Prism. But I'm one of these people where my cup is always half full. And what we have got is the Alapa Party, led by Alex Salmond. Like him or loathe him, he's a brilliant political strategist, and he can outwit the best of them in Westminster, and he will lead us out once again out of the quagmire that Scotland is in. And if we don't follow him and support him, we may as well throw in the towel, because there is no one else I'm confident in that can deliver independence to the Scottish people. And a lot of it is down to the Scottish people. Look, we had a rally in George Square, Freedom Square in Glasgow, organised by socialist stalwart Tommy Sheridan. And that square should have been rammed full. Instead, a lot of really good people turned up, but not enough. It wasn't enough. A few weeks before, we had the Believe in Scotland march. A few thousand turned up. And I don't care whether it was 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, depending who you talk to. It doesn't matter. It needed to be 50,000. We need to regain the spirit that we had in 2014, where even though we lost, we were victorious. 45% was a magnificent achievement. And the SNP haven't moved the dial one bit, but the people of Scotland have. And now we've got a situation where the people of Scotland, more than 50%, want independence. And Eva's quite right. It's unbelievable. But the SNP committees are sitting now anointing and appointing politicians who don't even bloody believe in independence. So we are going backwards instead of forwards. And it's down to the people in Scotland. You either want independence or you want to be on your bloody knees kowtowing to that lot in Westminster. Well, I know where I want to be, and it's not on my knees.
Well said. While we're on the topic of all this, Lloyd, there's some wonderful coming through of people passing vetting for the SNP. And one of them is Rhiannon Spear, who left, I don't know, it was about a year ago, said she was giving up politics because of nasty people. That's the one, her with the British Union Jack mug. I wouldn't let that name my lips. I don't think many of the people watching this show would either. But she is renowned and said, and I think we've got another one there, Techie, where she said she doesn't believe in independence. I'd like to get away from all that together. For me, it's always been devolution, self-determination plus, in other words, Devo Max. Tell me something, Lloyd. How in the hell does someone who doesn't believe in independence pass vetting for a supposed independence party? Well, people like Craig Murray, for example, failed vetting when he was in the SNP. I don't understand it.
I think you have to take it into the context of what the next step with the SNP is, which is the absolute acceptance of devolution. Any of these people, I mean, Kirsty Blackman, who has been in Westminster since 2015, she said within the 2 years of being there that independence was now something that she never talked about in the doorstep, and she didn't talk about it in Westminster because it wasn't important. Now, all of these people are very tightly connected to the for want of a better word description, the woke policies followed by the SNP and the Greens, and it would appear that if you are in the cabal, which was Nicola's cabal, which seems to have transferred directly to being Hamza's cabal, then yes, you pass vetting. I mean, I'm shocked by the people that have passed vetting. But one of the things I've noticed with a lot of them are people who, when you read their biographies, they wanted to be in television, or they wanted to be an actor or an actress. We've got one here in Edinburgh, Councillor Kate Campbell, who wanted to be in television as well. And it seems that there is this bleed over from middle class kids who want to be famous, but they don't want to work for it, are moving into politics because politics gets you on the telly. They can't play sport, they can't act, so they go into politics. And it seems that the SNP was an easy mark for these people. The tragedy for me is the thousands of people or hundreds of people I've known over the years who gave their lives for something, or gave their time and their lives for something they believed that was a cause, that they looked outside of themselves. It wasn't about them being on television. It was about moving the country forward. It was about creating opportunity for our children and future generations. And I would just love to ask these people exactly what they think they're doing in the Scottish National Party. But then again, we've had, other senior figures, or, people who are described, we do it ourselves. We call people senior figures when in actual fact that's only because that's what they've been called in the newspapers, and that's what the press office of the SNP have told the journalists to refer to them as. The reality is these people are pygmies. They have little or no understanding of the ordinary lives of ordinary people. And most importantly of all, they have no drive to improve people's lives. They have no drive to improve the lives of the people of this country. And that, for me, is the greatest crime for anyone who goes into politics. If you are not there to make things better, but there purely to project yourself, then you're in the wrong business. And it is an absolute disgrace that anyone should use the votes of ordinary working people simply to get themselves a profile and a fat bank account.
Yeah, disgusting. I should just say that Kirsty Blackman, who did make that statement saying she hardly ever mentioned it, because the people in the House of Commons, the people of Aberdeen are not interested in it, she's become all independence this week. She's raring to go. Independence, nothing less, that's, and it's so, Phil, it's so transparent, these people. And the sad thing about it is so many people will be taken in.
Yeah, we don't need to read the runes on this. It's bloody obvious, people. For some of us, it was obvious quite some time ago, but this is the gradualised transmogrification of SNP to be just another British party, because that's where it's headed right now. And transmogrify, I had to look it up. To see exactly what it meant. I knew what it meant, but it says transform in a surprising or magical manner. Well, it should be surprising that the SNP is becoming British. But to us in the know, sadly, it's not a surprise. But it's certainly not magical. It's so predictable. It's so predictable because this is exactly what the establishment want us to become, and they are pulling the strings and controlling those who think they're in charge of the SNP. They're not in charge. They'll do exactly as they're told, as we've said for a long time. And I just laugh. I'm just laughing at some of these clowns that come on. And you know what? Coco the Clown has got a vote just as strong as I have. One vote, one person. But the Coco the Clowns that come on and say MI5 and they're laughing at us for being tin foil hat wearers, nothing could be further from the truth. What they're just trying to do is continue to discredit those of us who have seen it firsthand, who know who the infiltrators are, who would like to do something about it. But until we get the majority of the people in the SNP and in Scotland on board with what's happening to our independence movement, then the divisions will continue, the splits will continue, the pointless and ruinous fighting. It's ruining our chances. It's just delaying it. In truth, in the long term, it will just delay it because we will get there. I'm 100% certain of that. But we need to wake up, and we don't need. This is not a sign. This is just yet more evidence, as if you need it, that the SNP is a busted flush.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it several times on here, Eva, about how there's the last 4 or 5, even half a dozen polls have shown independence is over the 50% now. Yet the gap back to the SNP is growing. It seems every week more and more people coming off. We've commented on here and saw over in Rutherglen when you've got 2 MPs, an MSP, 2 councillors, and 2 staff members getting a photograph and no workers. The fact has come through now that we've heard. I mean, we know in the Alba Party, we've got people competing for every post. There's 7 places on the SNP NEC that cannot be filled, apparently, because no one's stepping forward. They are, as Yvonne's alluded to, heading for an enormous crash. And then they put someone like Anne Spear up who says she doesn't believe in independence, and they wonder why it's happening.
Well, there's really 2 aspects I would draw out of that. And one is that whether it's in Holyrood or in Westminster, the people that are appointed by the SNP leaders, whether it's First Minister or Westminster leader, into positions as cabinet secretaries or spokespersons, appear these days to almost be signally unqualified for the jobs that they're being given. So you've got the ridiculous situation where people who know very little about the law have been running the justice system in Scotland, or somebody who knows very little about the NHS has been in charge of the NHS in Scotland. I don't need to remind anybody about the great wealth of talent that there is in the SNP in Westminster that languishes on the back benches because their face doesn't fit for a seat in the front row. So leaders or so-called leaders in both these places who refuse to surround themselves by capable people, but who seem to prefer to be surrounded by yes men. And the problem with that is that Scotland suffers in the context of how it's governed by Holyrood, and the independence movement suffers because of how it's represented by the SNP in Westminster. And so the general public looking in on all of this becomes disheartened because we see that the government that was so competently run in the period up to the 2014 referendum is being trashed repeatedly over and over again. In addition, with a movement that Robin McAlpine wrote about today, whereby we now understand that instead of civil servants being in post to give advice to elected politicians about what they can and cannot do, and to tell them diplomatically, if they can, where they're making a mistake, civil servants are now also employed and expected to be yes men. And again, that's a great dilemma and pretty disastrous for the style and the mode and the success or otherwise of government in Scotland. Basically, what's wrong is we're being governed by people who are actually not just sellouts or dishonest, but our leaders are no longer fit for purpose. That is abundantly clear. And those who currently lead the Scottish Government and the SNP in Westminster have got to be replaced by others within that party or others within the wider movement, because in the absence of that, Scotland is not united. Scotland is gubbed for decades. The proof of the pudding was there in Rutherglen this week, where we have seen, as you've said, innumerable big guns wheeled out. But the candidate for the SNP is not trusted to speak up for herself, sit at a top table at a hustings and be questioned by women. Women in the main who are my age or older, who want to talk about women's rights, who want to talk about schools, who want to talk about gender recognition reform, and instead the SNP candidate is a no-show like so many others. And she was a no-show because she was feared, because that position that her party sought to promote and protect and defend in the Court of Session this week is actually indefensible. And that takes me on to, finally, the hard fact of the matter that the SNP leadership will not listen to advisors and others who know better than they do. They have repeatedly, steadfastly ignored legal advice. They've ignored advice on ferries. They've ignored advice on education. They've ignored advice on housing. They've ignored advice particularly on the law, to the extent where we saw earlier in the week Lord Carloway explain that no matter how much we might all wish to bring the law in relation to sexual assault trials and rape trials into the 21st century, one of the reasons why we cannot do it is we do not have the manpower. We do not have the defence lawyers that are needed to make the system function the way that it should. And this is a position that Hamza Yousaf's predecessor was warned about by lawyers over and over and over again. She wouldn't listen. He's not listening. The system is breaking down. And unfortunately, there were tell long ago, and that debacle will continue to run across all disciplines and all areas of the Scottish Government and Scottish society for as long as we've got politicians who will refuse to listen to those who know better.
I would also say, well said, Eva, but also wasn't just Katie Loudon of the SNP failed to show. Neither did the Labour candidate Shanks, neither did the Liberal candidate. And worst of all, we had the SSP. Yeah, there we go. There's a good one. All chickens. The SSP came out and said, oh, they weren't going to come and sit with a load of right-wing women, and it was pointless, which I found, as an old lefty myself, I found that quite distasteful. But when we'll come on now to the GRRB, we seem to mention Wings every week, and rightly so, because he is a guiding light for a lot of us in the independence movement. He was quick to point out and show where the collapse started, the massive collapse for the SNP, and the forming, getting rid of the First Minister, Sturgeon, all was related back to the GRRB bill, Yvonne. It's what caused the problem. And here we are, as you've just said, this week, knowing this, and everybody knows that's what's hurting the SNP, they've gone to the Court of Session to challenge the Section 35. It's self-harming, or are they making a point?
It beggars belief. I mean, you look at Canada, hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million Canadians are marching, demanding that their children are given a childhood. And it's all around this Trudeau, who wants to bring in just as many barking mad policies as the SNP government, and it's absolute madness. I really feel sorry for journalists like Robin, who have to report on this crap week after week after week. You know, you can see that the emperor is not wearing any clothes, but you get criticized if you dare mention it, and are no platformed. You know, this is bloody Scotland. What the hell has happened to you? I'm struggling to recognize this country at the moment, and the population is going down. There's probably a brain drain right now, and everybody is sitting back and not taking any notice, apart from the billionaires who look at Scotland, fancy it as their backyard, their playground, and it's like the Highland clearances part 2. Scotland is being ethnically cleansed by these billionaire classes who want to build gated communities. Gates, why? This is a country where we are supposed to be able to roam wherever we want. And yet these rich bastards are coming over here wanting to build their gated communities to keep out the hoi polloi. And we're not doing anything. We can't even fill George Square and protest. People have got to wake up and understand what is happening. And Ukraine is not that far away. Britain apparently has just agreed to send some long distance missiles over to Ukraine so that the Ukrainians can fire a missile with the capacity to fly more than 100 miles into Russia. Well, this is escalating a proxy war started by the Americans. And I'll tell you when it'll end. When we're told to send our kids to put on British Army uniforms to go and fight, because that is where this is going to end. I was listening to George Robertson, that sellout Labour politician, and he's waving the flag for NATO and being a big cheerleader for Zelensky, and you just realise, you know, this war is going to go on for 10 years, at least, at the very least. And when it finishes, I bet you any money that our children have been pushed into it. Scots have got to rise up and stop this from happening. There's a march on this weekend, I think. we've got to go. We've got to show our strength of feeling. At the moment, the billionaires are just laughing at us and think, oh, well, we'll build a gate around them and we'll keep them out of the way. They love Scotland. That Jeff Bezos was sailing around the coastline in his super yacht just a couple of weeks ago. They love Scotland. And of course they should. We've got wonderful mountains, brilliant lochs. We've got whiskey. We've got an abundance of water, natural energies and renewables. You know, this country should be soaring, but it's not. It's being used as the swag bag for the rich.
I don't know how we got from JRRB to that, but I agree with you on that. Just to say that the thing about the emperors wearing no clothes, it's not quite true. The emperor nowadays in Scotland wears the empress's clothes. That's where we find ourselves now. On that, the women won't wish, Lloyd. It was cancelled by what they called, is it Stage 18 or something they're called, who cancelled it and then under pressure brought it back, and they allowed it to go ahead. But the fact that the major parties who are promoting this policy then fail to turn up in a simple hustings, as Eva alludes to, with middle-aged and older women. What? You're sure your position. Why would you be scared to go to such a meeting, Lloyd?
I think you're scared to go to a meeting because slowly but surely it's making its way through that what they're talking and what they're proposing, certainly in terms of the gender recognition reform bill, doesn't make sense and is indefensible in the world of science. I think it's fairly obvious to those out with the political bubble that ordinary people in the street, you only have to look at the social attitude survey that came out this week that has, you know, the support for gender recognition reform has absolutely collapsed and is collapsing on a regular basis. I think these politicians are, I mean, particularly Miss Loudon, Shanks, the Green candidate and the Liberal Democrat candidate are simply expressing what has become the curse of politics these days, which is they follow slavishly the leadership line. And the leadership line is that men can be women and women can be men, right? That's the sum total of it. They know that that is an indefensible position when you stand up in front of normal thinking people. So they choose not to stand up in front of normal thinking people because they might have to say something that makes them A, look foolish, or B, might make them look bad in the eyes of their leader. This whole, the gender recognition issue has become more a test of loyalty for party members and elected members specifically than anything else now. This is its dying embers. And unfortunately, part of the fight to maintain some credibility for it, which it doesn't have, people are not prepared to say we were wrong. And there have been so many people in the political bubble behind this madness that they simply are incapable of saying that they were wrong and they've got this wrong and they will bow to the people. What none of them seem to understand, and this is where experience in politics counts now, and that's not necessarily about having older people, but certainly having people who've been round the block a few times, at least as advisors, if not elected members. They will say to you, the smart thing to do in a circumstance like this, where you've painted yourself into the corner, is throw up your hands and say something very simple. We got it wrong, people. You are right. We are wrong. It's astonishing the kudos that you get from the electorate. Yeah. If you do that, if you do it. In the same way, going back slightly, but if Humza or the SNP wants to put itself back on the tracks, heading to the independence that we all want, the simple thing to do to mark the ground as his own man and to bring the SNP back online would be to get all the Westminster members of Parliament to sign Neil Hamvey's self-determination bill. It's a simple thing.
Absolutely.
They only have to do that. It's such a simple thing, but the bigotry, the nastiness, the viciousness that exists within the leadership of the SNP prevents them from making that sensible political choice. It's a political choice, and it's the smart political choice, because you do that, you close the gap between the 52% of people who support independence and the 38% of people who support the SNP. It's foolish.
No, absolutely. I'm just ready, before I ask this question, it's on this whole GRRB thing, Phil. I want to play a video of one of our MSPs, Maggie Chapman. I don't know if you heard of this week over there in North Dakota. If you didn't, you're lucky. You're going to hear it now. And this is the sort of stuff we're getting. Techie, can you put up the Maggie Chapman making her speech about children and protections?
The reality of how much child abuse takes place at home, within families where children should be safest and most secure. We cannot allow cultural war rhetoric to rob children and young people of the support and help they need. The noisy clamour against confidentiality for children's gender identity is dangerous in its transphobic tendencies, but also in the way that it potentially undermines the safety of that vital space, home. Children and young people must be able to talk to responsible professionals about their lives with the assurance that information won't be shared with possibly abusive family members.
You know, abusive family members, Phil. He wants secrecy for kids under 16 to change their gender. This is the problem.
Yeah, it's a massive problem. I mean, she's off the scale. This person, she isn't, and she should not be in that position of power. In fact, when it comes down to it, I mean, this is state parenting. No state. I mean, don't get me wrong, the state needs to step in when required, but we've got social workers, and we should be investing in social work and supporting the kids who really need the help.
Mental health.
Mental health. The list goes on. Instead of doing the idiot, like virtue signalling, this is virtue signalling, and people who don't have kids, who do not give of themselves, who don't understand what it is to be a parent. I would give my life for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and these people don't have children. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in it. I'm just saying, how can you pretend to understand if you don't have the knowledge of either being a social worker or really seeing what the problems are, or being a parent yourself? We need people properly qualified in the right positions, and someone who isn't virtual signalling, because they're now going to the Court of Session with this. You know, and it's I mean, this gender reform bill would leave, I mean, it's basically leaving it wide open. For me, it's virtue signalling, and it's an easy win for these people to be seen to try and do the progressive human rights championing. Many of them already knowing it won't be allowed by the UK, but critically ignoring women and girls' rights to safe spaces. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be looking after our people, and they're picking on a minority of people who we've said often we support the rights of self-ID, but it cannot be. You cannot allow the child to do it without the parent's knowledge. You cannot and should not allow a child just to do this and then give them full recognition under law that they are now something which biologically they're not. Now that has to be. The right professionals and the right people need to step in to make sure that this is done properly. Now, the Yvonne and Eva, I know, are champions of this, and I'll leave it for them, but this woman should not be in that position. She should not have the power that she does, and she certainly doesn't represent the view of most parents in Scotland.
No, a couple of things here, Eva, on this. In the Court of Session this week, the Lord Advocate, again, I mean, I don't like to use the word lie, but misinformed, in my opinion, to say that there is no data to show that predatory men would use a GRC to get access to women vulnerable otherwise or in a vulnerable position. That's errant nonsense. But one of the problems is because they're not registering crimes properly now. They don't sort of say, this is, you know, these people who are calling, you know, he took out his penis and raped me. or she took out her penis rather than raped me. They're not actually categorising it. So she kind of, she must know that. And she still says there's no, and we've just got to look at Isla Bryson. We've just got to look at the butcher down in the Borders. Men will use anything to get into vulnerable women.
I think the difficulty with the Lord Advocate is that she ought not to cherry pick. She ought to present her case comprehensively and without the spin that was evident this week, because that's what it was. And the issue in terms of her presentation of her case and the conduct of Maggie Chapman actually boils down to women who should know better but clearly don't, obfuscating all the rules and all the safeguards that we've spent decades introducing and learning and training people on, to do with grooming, to do with understanding human behaviour, to do with understanding what a predator is, how predators behave, how you assess risk, why you assess risk. And, you know, the ridiculous set of circumstances that you've got under gender recognition reform as promoted by Maggie Chapman, and unfortunately also by the Lord Advocate, who takes the line that a GRC can change your sex for all purposes, is that a man with a GRC can go into, for example, a ladies' changing room and be naked in front of women and children there. And because he says he's female, it's not an offence. Is that where we're heading? Because it seems to be, in terms of the rhetoric that we've heard, whereas a man who doesn't claim to be female, if he does the same thing, is committing a crime. This is the utterly bizarre and ridiculous world that Scotland has now become. And it's going to get worse as the result of the coming into force of the hate crime legislation, because the Police Scotland, who clearly weren't bothered their backside enough about Julie Marshall to report to the Fiscal about the assault on her in Duffy Park in Aberdeen, but gave the assailant a warning, now are having a new department to deal with the hate crime legislation. So that in the real world, the feelings that have been hurt by people, and again, I go back to gender recognition reform and what that does, those hurt feelings are going to count more in future than the wounds and the bruises of the women who were assaulted but whose assailants were not prosecuted. Women will be prosecuted under hate crime legislation because, as I've said before, women will object to the men who self-identify as female invading female spaces. Scotland's going to become an awful lot darker place for a lot of people if we don't get a grip of where we're heading right now before it's too late.
Yeah, we've seen it, Yvonne, that I know as Lloyd alluded to, the Scottish Attitude Survey and other things, that more and more people are waking up to the dangers posed by self-identification and the GRR bill. And it's the popularity of what you want for it is growing. And I noticed Mary Hunter, the ex-First Minister's right-hand woman, was bemoaning that it was the transphobes and the people who had caused this problem. But the real reason is this problem happened because it goes back to what we're talking about in Rutherglen, Hamilton and West, was that they don't debate, they try and stop debate, they try and stop women meeting, they try and stop talk, and they brought people's attention to it, and their behaviours is what made people sit up and go, oh yeah, this can't be right. If we're not allowed to debate it, we're not allowed to talk about it, and if we've got to say that a guy is a woman, no, that's not right. That's what caused the problem, not people pointing out the errors of their legislation.
Well, you know, I'm a plain speaker. And I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. And the Lord Advocate, in fact, let's ditch the title. We're talking about Dorothy Bain. She doesn't know her arse from her elbow. If it's got a penis, love, it's a man. And it's as simple as that. And that's all that needs to be said. And for her to go up and stand in court as an officer of the law, it's absolute rubbish. You know, this is I think I said a few episodes ago, I wouldn't ask her to defend me in over a parking ticket. I think that the woman's incompetent, which I think is a defamatory statement. But hell, if she wants to sue me, it's not going to go far. She's not that good. But this whole GRR thing, 1 million parents, angry people, marched in Canada to tell Justin Trudeau to leave their kids alone. And what is it going to take to get the Scottish government out of our nurseries, out of kids' bedrooms? Leave the children alone. Let them have a childhood. And, the brains aren't fully developed until somebody reaches the age of 25. I want everybody to cast their mind back to when they were about 13, 14. What did your teenage bedroom look like? Who did you have up on the wall? Who was your heartthrob? Who was your boyfriend or girlfriend when you were 13, 14? And think, if that was your choice then, and you were saddled with it for the rest of your life, hell, I would have Gary Glitter still on my bloody bedroom wall, and I wouldn't want that. But we've kids change their minds week by week, and they go from one fad to another, and some fads are dangerous. Who remembers clackers? Those things that you just ended up smashing your wrists with. And this Maggie Chapman, she's a flaming danger to children. So there, that's what I've said.
Yeah. I really don't want to talk about myself when I was 14 in my bedroom. I'm really not going there. I'm not going there. Yvonne, you'll get us here. I mean, you'll get us here one day. I know we have a very famous KC watches this programme, and so I might be needing some free legal advice soon if Yvonne keeps this up.
Don't go for legal advice, for God's sake. This is the woman who went and into the courts to argue for independence for Scotland.
It wasn't the only news in town, and the clock's kicking on, Lloyd. There's a few more things, folks, I want to get in this week. And one of them is for your dear city in Old Reekie there. I remember back in 2007, and one of the promises we had from the SNP was they were going to scrap the trams. And as soon as we get into power, the unionists sort of thought, well, we need to tug your chain, you nasty, pesky gnats. And they forced it through. Now, the inquiry came out this week, and I noticed that the first off the blocks was Douglas Ross to the Tory party, and the House Jock media are all trying to blame the SNP. Now, this forum here is one of the most critical places for the SNP in the universe. But on this one, they are not guilty. They may have not been super hyper efficient and could have maybe saved a wee bit here and there, Lloyd. But the unionists, this is their mess, not the SNP's.
That's true, Roddy, but it's only true up to a point. I mean, we in Parliament we resisted it and we rejected it. We didn't have a majority in the Parliament at the time, so we lost. And Labour and the Liberal Democrats were in charge, and with a coalition with the Tories as well, if truth be told, in Edinburgh City Council. But the following year, the SNP took control of the council, and the whole attitude changed. And the attitude changed primarily for those of us who live in Edinburgh, because we elected such idiot councillors who didn't really understand what they were getting into. Most of them were from that early 2015 intake into the SNP, who had a meteoric rise in the party, ended up councillors, and they decided, most of them people who were not born in this city nor had lived in this city for very long, decided that it would look nice if it had a tram. And they fought tooth and nail against, to be honest with you, the grassroots membership of the SNP in Edinburgh, who were entirely and completely opposed to it, but they steamrolled over that. And one particular individual who led the SNP group in the council at the time, the council leader, Adam McVeigh, was the biggest cheerleader for the trams ever. And he was the one that forced, effectively, the Scottish government into coming up with the new money. Now, you can blame the SNP if you want. It doesn't change the fact that if you elect incompetents who don't know what they're doing, they will carry out the instructions that they are given by the council officers with little or no examination of it whatsoever, little or no due diligence. That's what the report really said. It said that officers lied to them. It said that also certain political leaders, and that meant the leaders of the political groups and those that served on the Transport Committee, that they were lying to their colleagues. It's a mixture of things, but it should never be allowed to happen again. It's the amount of money that has been spent, not only on the trams, you know, as Angus Brendan McNeill pointed out the other day, you could have 11 tunnels from the Western Isles to the mainland of Scotland for the money it took to build the tram line from the airport to the centre of Edinburgh. I mean, that's just a fact. And now we've got £18 million on top of it for the inquiry. Blame the SNP if you want. They are culpable up to a point, but only after the leadership changed after 2014-15.
You know, there's so many such things we've seen, Phil. But something else I want to move on to is that, you know, the SNP have been pushing, one of the things they're pushing these days is affordable housing, as opposed to council house building. You know, I was looking at some of the facts now. The average house price in Q1 2023 in Scotland, the average house price is £210,000. The median wage in Scotland is 27,000. Those two things don't match up.
No, they don't. They don't. They certainly don't. And of course, this is Thatcher, obviously instigated the selling housing, council housing, to raise revenue for the councils. But instead, what should have happened there, because there are situations when it makes sense to sell housing into the private sector, only if you're using revenue and have another policy to spend it on building new council housing and new I'm in the construction game, and the term affordable housing doesn't mean housing that is affordable. It means you tick the box on the permitory that allows you to build the rest of the development while putting something in there that's slightly cheaper. That's what it really means. So it's an illusion to call it affordable housing, because ballpark, I mean, you should spend about a third in your accommodation, right? 27,000 is just over £9,000 a year. So you take that out, that's what, about 750 a week net of tax, what, 550, 600 a week? It doesn't get you very much at current interest rates. That's if on the 27 grand you've managed to save enough for your deposit and your fees, etc. So this is not working, and the whole idea of getting more people into council houses, it's kicked back a wee bit, because my parents, we would have looked at buying our council house had we not already built our own housing when we started a building company back in Scotland. We would have bought our council house that I grew up in, which was a great house. Someone eventually did. But what's happening now is, because the young people can't afford to do it anymore, the parents who benefited from buying their council houses for knockdown prices are now remortgaging them to fund their kids' purchase of private housing going forward. So it was basically a way for the government not to fund the councils, and for the councils to get rid of housing stock in lieu of properly managing their housing stock and in properly managing their budgets. It's another con, and who's paying for it? The punter yet again.
Yeah. I mean, Eva, the fact is, I remember if I remember right, you could get 2 times your salary as the husband or the male, or 2.5 times your salary, and your wife got half times the salary. Well, How can youngsters afford this sort of price? It's just impossible. We need to get back to council housing and state-owned homes.
What we need to have is we need politicians who have a vision and who will think out of the box and who will employ advisors who are also visionaries and have technical and economic know-how. We need, as we've said so many times before, a national energy company, and we also need a national house building corporation, so that we are actually building houses that people can not only afford to live in, but they can afford to heat them and they can afford to have a decent standard of living. Now, if we had politicians who were driven to make Scotland a better place for so many hundreds of thousands of people for whom life is not currently a walk in the park, then we would be doing these things. We could do this with devolution. I'd rather do it properly with independence, but we could be creating a different landscape in Scotland today if the political will and the political understanding were actually there. They're not. They should be. There's no excuse why not. It's what's needed is an understanding of the needs of the vast majority of the folk of this country who cannot afford mortgages at the level that they are just now, who don't have the income, who don't have the spending power. Some working people in Scotland get to the end of the third week of the month and they've got nothing left and have a week to go before their wage comes in. I know these people. I live beside them. I work, near to some of them. I work for others of them. There are so many people in Scotland who work and are having to use food banks and clothing banks and school clothing banks and baby banks. And yet these are people that are hard grafters, that work 5 shifts a week or work overtime as well. Some of them are nurses. Some of them are police officers. It's not good enough. It's really not good enough. And, it's easy to say, well, we can blame Westminster for this. But we should be blaming those that we elected to get us out of the union for this. Because if they had done the job that they were elected to do, Scotland would be a different place today. We would have a national energy company. We would have something sensible done about house building. Our homeless figures wouldn't be what they are. Our drugs and addictions figures wouldn't be what they are, because people would have better lives and they would have hope. And tomorrow would be guaranteed to be a better, easier day than today. As it is, next week, next month, next year, we're staring into an abyss unless and until we've got politicians that actually put the needs of the people of the country first before their own. Country before party. That's why we need Scotland united without delay. And if the SNP continue to turn their backs on that, they are in turn turning their backs on the desires of the majority of the people of this country, who will not forget.
Here. One of the things that's come out this week in Rutherglen, when we had a visit from Sir Keir Starmer, that raving socialist that leads the Labour Party. And he reiterated once again that no way under any circumstances will the Labour Party ever devolve employment law to Scotland or permit a referendum. Another reason why we need to get the hell out of this union. We're never going to get in out of it.
Everything comes back to independence. And we have seriously got to ask ourselves, how much do we want it? And what are we prepared to do to get it? And sitting on our backsides bemoaning the Tories in Westminster isn't going to cut it. We had that already. We've done that already with Margaret Thatcher. At least the Scots got up and revolted then over a poll tax. We've really got to get that spirit back again, that fighting spirit, and resist the craziness that's coming out of Westminster. I mean, Phil was talking about the price of property. It's going to rocket when these billionaires move in and get rid of all the local people and ethnically cleanse the area. I was reading about the Highland clearances the first time round. They banned bloody tartan and banned people from wearing the kilt and banned them from speaking the language. It was, apart from the landed gentry, of course, the boss class were okay. They could wear what they want. And we're going to go back to that, where people can no longer afford to live next to the big house or the lead or whatever, because property prices will have skyrocketed that much. They won't be able to afford to live there. Their children won't be able to afford to live there. And then they're going to put these gates all around, so you won't even be able to walk through where you used to live and say, well, you see those little stones there, that's where our family lived. That's what's going to happen. We're going to be pushing people into the inner cities and have our beautiful highlands as a playground for these billionaires who, quite frankly, have so much money they don't know what to do with it. In fact, in one of these programs I was listening to last week, they said you can put all the top billionaires into a double-decker bus and they will control and own and have more money than the populations of third world countries. These few privileged elite that Westminster is looking after. I mean, you have to wonder, why is the richest man in Westminster, Rishi Sunak, sitting there earning a piddly amount of money to what he can earn? I think he's on about 160 grand a year. Why is he putting himself through that when he himself is a multi-billionaire who's married to a woman who was richer than Elizabeth II? Why is he doing it? Because he's looking after his mates who are also billionaires and making sure that they're making even more money. The people who are really doing well out of this economic climate are the billionaires. They're making more money than they ever made. You know, they're going up. And what's happening to us, the mugs down here? We're being shut on from a great height, and we can't even get angry enough to jump on a bus to go and stand in Freedom Square and complain and shout about it. It's, you know, we've really got to get our act together. Let's forget about the SNP. They're dead. Monty Python's parrot dead. They're not coming back. They'll be gone in a couple of years' time, probably. And we have got to focus on where we want to be. And we need as a priority to get the hell out of Westminster.
Yeah. I agree. I think we all agree. We're coming to the end. We're already over time. But there's a subject, it's a delicate subject I want to cover, folks. And it's all the news at the moment is Russell Brand. Now, I'm not going to make any comment on his guilt or what he's done or what he's accused of. It's all sub judice. We've all been before. We heard this about someone else before, massive. And it is a favourite thing of the British state to have a nice wee sex scandal to destroy and ruin someone. But I want to ask the question. I mean, he seems to be getting tried by the media. And I noticed one thing come through that the British government wrote to TikTok and to Rumble and asked them to be demonetised. Well, they admitted they hadn't done anything against the state. They wanted them demonetised anyway. Is it a coincidence that he's been talking out against the establishment, against tax evasion, against the theft of COVID money, against Ukraine and funding the Nazis in Ukraine? Is it a coincidence, Lloyd?
I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it certainly looks like one. Until the chair of the parliamentary committee, who just happens to be married to the ex-commander of the 77th Brigade of the British Army, sent out letters. I'm appalled by any trial by media any trial before it, any attempt to gauge guilt or innocence prior to the opportunity that the individual accused has to be judged by his peers or her peers. Too many times in my lifetime, people have had their lives destroyed. Indeed, in some cases, in countries where they have the death penalty, people have died as a result of trial by media, inasmuch as they have created an atmosphere whereby it's impossible, utterly and completely impossible, for people to be tried in an even-handed way. I mean, we'll find out the truth about the Russell Brand situation, but I do think the whole idea that you move against someone before they've been charged or properly investigated and attempt to remove their means of sustenance, for want of a better description, is completely and utterly wrong. I charge them, take them to court, let the decision be made there. But anything else is wrong for me.
Yeah, Phil, we've seen it in Scotland where the newspapers have. Luke Mitchell is a classic example. Alex Salmon's another one where the papers found him guilty. Well, they even did a documentary that he was guilty, and then before the result had been made, it kind of ruined their programme when he was found innocent. Again, I'm not going to pass judgment on that. I mean, I personally, I think Russell Brand's about as funny as a bucket load of piranha in your swimming pool. I just don't, it does nothing for me. But I'm against this trial by media and this smearing before it's gone before a trial with 12 of his peers to judge the evidence.
Absolutely. The whole Russell Brand issue, it's guilt by accusation, and the phrase is, well, as it is, I think it's coined from the Alan Dershowitz book, which shows how social media can be weaponized, and it's exactly what happens. It can be done. As to his guilt or innocence, well, we'll leave that to the courts, quite rightly. But and then let's be clear, no one disagrees that allegations of rape, sexual abuse, and the like can be ignored. And they do need to be investigated properly. But there are also some things such as false. I'm not talking about Brand here in particular. I'm just talking about generally speaking. There are false accusations of rape. The only rape case I was involved with in Strathclyde Police as a police officer, junior police officer, turned out to be a false accusation of rape. So what of equality in the eyes of the law? What about the accused rights? People do have rights, and there are many reasons for false allegations, including deliberate deception, such as the attempt to destroy Alex Salmon you mentioned earlier. Never forget this. We need to expose what really happened here, who was involved, who went along with it, including the establishment and the institutions that were involved in this, as well as the SNP leadership, of course, and the Alphabet Women. But there are many reasons for this. We need to remember, as you talked about earlier, this is a classic modus operandi from the establishment to discredit or destroy those who threaten their hegemony. And just look at Luke Mitchell's a great example of a false accusation and just bad policing. And that's I would advise anyone to go over that old episode on Prism, where that was horrific what we saw there. But you look at Julian Assange, Craig Murray, Alex Salmon, to name a few. They have been deliberately falsely accused of sexual misconduct / rape. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll find a lot more. And these are all people who are standing up against the establishment and being punished by them. It's a classic way of manipulating social media and proving, if you can call it that, guilt by accusation.
You're our legal eagle on here. And again, we've already made the caveat. We're not going to make any on what's may or may not happen. But the fact that the British government right to TikTok and Rumble before formal charges in court is rather unusual, is it not?
There's something extremely sinister about this. And again, I would not comment on that particular fellow's guilt or innocence, but on the principle. And as a lawyer, obviously, as a court lawyer, I look at the evidence. And in work, obviously, if I'm investigating a case, because I do civil law, not criminal law now, I look at the evidence for and against my client's position. And I had a case a few years ago which was widely reported, and it led to some changes in social work practice. But what I had was a set of circumstances where a number of social workers had written reports about a family. And the reports were pretty straightforward, and they were pretty one-sided, and they were pretty damning. And these social workers came to court, gave their evidence, they were cross-examined by me, and eventually they admitted that they had lied. They admitted in the witness box in Alloa Sheriff Court in 2010 and 2011 that they had fabricated case notes, fabricated case records. They had lied to a series of children's panels, and they had lied in their evidence to the sheriff. And at the end of the case, the sheriff issued a written decision, and he said that there had been a dereliction of statutory duty by the local authority who had failed to safeguard the welfare of the child. And the sheriff said there was a culture of poor record keeping at all levels in the department and an absence of relevant planning. So you never know in the law where the evidence will take you until the evidence is heard and the case is tested. And this is one of these instances where people might not like what they hear, they might not like what they see, they might have their own views as to somebody's culpability or otherwise. But unless and until these matters are tested properly in court and evidence is laid, it ill behoves any commentator to reach any conclusions. A different position applies in relation to the people directly involved, but those who are not directly involved should take a step back and remain neutral pending due and proper process.
Yes, yeah. Yvonne, you worked in the newspaper industry for a long number of years. Down south just now, they're having radio phone-in programmes about this. I mean, I don't know if the law is different down there or not, but they're having radio phone-in programmes about this. And, you know, the media absolutely going for this guy. And as Eva said, until it goes to court, this is just wrong.
Absolutely. There's a lot of hypocrisy around the whole Russell Brand case. I find him odious. I always have. When he played that really nasty stunt on Andrew Sachs, when he was going out with Andrew Sachs's granddaughter. But it was him and Jonathan Ross, and I like the way Jonathan Ross has neatly sideswerved any of the shit that's hit the fan in the last week. Russell Brand is like everybody else. He's entitled to a fair hearing. And, you know, you mentioned before about the Alex Salmon case. I'm still waiting for those alphabetties to stand in court and plead one way or another to charges of perjury, because they were prepared to see the leader of Scotland's independence movement. They were prepared to feed him to the wolves. And so they've got to answer for that. And if Russell Brand is a similar victim of wrong accusations, then he deserves justice as well. But I have to say, his bad behaviour, and his behaviour is bad, has been enabled by the mainstream media, by the BBC, who continued to employ him even when he did some terrible things. I mean, today, I think it was today, we had Lorraine, the darling of Scotland, complaining because he'd called her a slut. Well, I watched that particular episode she was talking about in one of these late night chat shows, and she was giggling away at his accusation. And then she said, you know, now I look back and I just feel uneasy. And I just thought, oh, for God's sake, Lorraine, get a grip of yourself. You know, what is interesting out of this whole thing is people are saying it's not just Russell Brand who may be at fault here. It's a possible Me Too moment for the whole comedian circuit, which is a predominantly male branch of entertainment. So there's a lot more that will come out, but he doesn't deserve this trial by media. There's only one place for a trial, and that's in a court. And God forbid it's rigged against him in the way that the Salmon trial was. In fact, when you look back at the Salmon trial, it's a miracle that Alex emerged unscathed, you know, with everything that was thrown at him. And of course, they say if you throw enough mud at somebody, it sticks. And of course, people are now beginning to understand what the hell went on. And this was, you know, in about 40, 50 years' time, long after we've gone, when the archives open in Kew Gardens, we'll probably find out that it was an MI5 job, and that these Alphabeti women were useful stooges.
Agent Sturgeon behind it.
Sorry?
Agent Sturgeon being the agent that was operating it all.
Oh, well, you know, a lot will come out about her, and it will come out.
I hope so. I hope I live long enough to see it and her demise.
Well, I don't
Well, the
think
clock's beating us. We have to go. We have to call it a day there. We really are way over our time. Can I just say, remember next Saturday, folks, AO, all under one banner in Falkirk. We may or may not have a representation there. It depends on lots of things, including the weather. But there you go. On Saturday, the 23rd. Have I got my dates going right again? Oh, Julie is gone. It was yesterday. I'm talking Edinburgh on the 6th and 7th of October. Don't forget, that's the one. You know, we're going to be there definitely, and we'll see you there. I hope you've enjoyed this today as much as we've enjoyed talking to you. It's been a heck of a week. This is my 4th podcast this week, including one I did for someone else. But anyway, I hope you're not sick of the sight of me already. And we'll see you all very, very soon. Till we do, please, you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.